I dropped everything and I started my education all over again. And I applied to medical school and I got accepted. And I was a 32-year-old medical student, which is about 10 years older than the rest of my classmates. But I didn't care. And then I quit that to start a company, and people thought I was crazy. But I said, I got one life to live and I'm going to make the most of it. And if I fail miserably, then who cares?
Welcome to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast. We believe life is about how we react. Hey, thanks for tuning in today. We are having a blast with this season, and we're thankful that you're tuning in. So thank you for listening. We've got another top 5 coming at you from a guest. As you all know, we've been doing this top 5 segment, and we're enjoying having our guests come on and share without any kind of pretext what their top 5 is going to be. So we've been looking forward to this conversation, and we hope that you enjoy it too. Ben, welcome to the show. Can you tell us what top 5 things do you want to share with us today?
Sure. I'd love to share top 5 books with you guys.
Sweet. We haven't done books yet, so here we go. Let's hear some of your favorites.
Off the top of my head, I wrote down 5 books that I think your listeners would appreciate knowing.
All right. So Ben, let's hear it. What's book number 1?
Yeah. So the theme is kind of overcoming challenges and then path to success. So that's kind of the theme. So
Sweet.
Challenge, obviously, which I guess maybe we'll get into, is going to be my medical AVM hemorrhage and then how I overcame that. So the first book, Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl.
Nice.
So it's kind of how you overcome a trauma. What is the meaning? And then you kind of reflect. And then number 2 would be Alchemist by Paul Coelho. Like, what is the grand plan for my life after all going through this? Number 3, any book by Anthony Robbins. So probably, I don't know. There's so many good ones. Unlimited Power, maybe.
I had the same idea when you said Viktor Frankl. I just saw anything that he wrote, whether it was a letter or a poem or a book, like anything Viktor Frankl is legit. And I would agree with the Anthony Robbins idea as well.
Yeah, exactly. And so these are impactful for me because I remember reading each of these at special times in my life when I needed somebody to tell me what the meaning of life was. And then that was Viktor Frankl. And then how to turn that into power, and that's Unlimited Power, Anthony Robbins. So then in my life, I had a plan and I wanted to start a company. And so the book that I picked for that was Built to Last by Jim Collins and Jerry Porras. And so that became the blueprint of a company that I started 6 years ago. And then we got into the execution, like the daily execution for executing that blueprint. And then so the final book on my list is Atomic Habits by James Clear.
I love the narrative behind the progression of your book choices, and I think this is something that everyone can kind of write down and check out all those books. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you guys have, I'm sure, like your narrative and your journey. There's probably some resources, conversations, books along the way that, you know, that if I were interviewing you, you'd be like, oh, okay, this one and this one and this one.
Absolutely.
Dr. Seuss, Cat in the Hat. No, but I love that. Again, like Kyle said, the succession there, and to me, I just think you were reading on purpose, right? There was some intention. Okay, I got to figure out how to get beyond this. I got to figure out how to turn it into something great. I've got to execute a plan, and I love that notion because that's really the theme of what we've been talking about so far this season. What a powerful list. I haven't read all those, but I have heard of every single one of those books. I know they are powerful, especially if we're able to take the principles in those books and find a way to adapt them and apply them to your own life. So, Ben, thank you for sharing that incredible list.
And I'll give another bonus tip is you don't actually have to read the books. I have seen all the reviews, the book summaries on YouTube,
There you go.
and there's some really good ones. So if you just have 20 minutes and you want to see what are the main points from the book, I don't have a few hours to read the book. I got 20 minutes. You'll get,
Nice.
I don't know, 60-80% of the content from it.
Wow. Yeah, I've never done that before. What do you just search on YouTube for the book titles?
Book summary, Atomic Habits, and you'll find a whole bunch of them in 20 minutes. You'll get most of the points from the book.
Oh, nice.
Beautiful. Well, Ben, I imagine that some of our listeners know who you are. They recognize your voice, and they can probably assume. I don't know if I've said your last name yet, but they can probably figure it out, like who Ben is. But for the handful of listeners that aren't familiar with your voice or your story, or that the guy named Ben, we want to welcome you to our show and introduce you to our listeners so we know your story, a little bit of it, and we know you have made an incredible impact to the entire rare disease community over the last several years. We've been looking forward to this conversation. So, in your own words, can you tell our listeners a little bit about you and your rare disease journey?
Yeah, so in 2006, my journey with rare disease began. I had in the summer of 2006, out of nowhere, I had a near fatal brain hemorrhage caused by an AVM, which is a rare form of stroke caused by a blood vessel condition that I never knew I had. I recovered from the stroke, very lucky to recover fully. Then I had emergency brain surgery and then subsequent brain surgeries. And along the way, during my recovery, I felt so much loneliness and anxiety and fear. And so I went online to try to find resources, to try to find other people who were going through the same as things that I was. But in 2007, there was very little. The social networks had not really taken off. Facebook was still in its infancy, and the best thing I could find was a mailing list from Harvard Medical School, and so I thought, okay, well, that's better than nothing. But I think I can, I think I can make a difference here because I have a background in software. So I built a very early version of a social network, and it was only for AVM survivors. It's called avmsurvivors.org. I joined, I spread the word, and eventually more people joined, and we became like a little family of AVM survivors. And then also my co-founder for Ben's Friends, Scott Orn, said, "This is fantastic. This is amazing. Why don't you do this for other rare diseases who may not have somebody with a software background that can start this?" So I said, sure. So we did research, and we started 2 more communities for different rare diseases, and those were very successful. People loved it. It was a warm, friendly place. And then we started another and another. And every time it just became so successful. Later on in 2012, we formed a 501c3 nonprofit for it. And then, more of the same, just building a very strong team of moderators. The moderators are the secret to all of this. And the moderators make sure that the community is warm and friendly. There's no... they keep out spammers. That's a huge problem. Yeah. They keep out the spammers, the charlatans, the snake oil salesmen,
sure.
all that stuff, and say they really protect the integrity of the community.
So over the last 15 years or so, you've committed and dedicated a significant part of your life to helping build community for so many different conditions. And the whole idea, I assume, and what I gathered from your story is just giving people a connection and more immediate than, like you said, a mailing list.
Yeah. And because rare diseases are so rare, obviously, it's not going to go to like a local hospital and find a in-person support group, but there are millions, thousands, maybe not millions, thousands of you with your rare disease, whatever it happens to be, around the world, and you just need a way to connect with them.
Yeah.
And I love being able to talk to you and hear a little bit more about Ben's Friends and the other work that you've done over the years. But I do want to let our listeners know, especially those friends that listen to our friend Effie Parks over at Once Upon a Dream podcast. She interviewed you not too long ago, and we wanted to promote that episode number 69. Effie and Ben had an amazing conversation that really chronicles your life story and journey with Ben's Friends. So be sure to hop over there and check it out, but not until you're done with this episode. All right, guys,
That's
you gotta
right.
finish this one and then go check out Effie. Ben, we both listened to that interview, and we've played around on your website, and we know a little bit about who you are and what you're doing. So would you mind sharing a little bit about yourself before the AVM? Like what was life like in 2005? What were your goals? What was that vision for your life in that season?
Sure. So before all of this happened, the plan was to be an entrepreneur. I wanted to be a co-founder of some kind of startup. So I had a background in software, and then I went to business school, and then that was the plan. And then that's when this happened.
You've built all these skills and you have this vision, but then life throws you a curveball and you still use those skills. You still are fulfilling your dream, just in a different way, depending on what life throws your way, right? And I love that about your story.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, so I did start a company. And there's a lot of parallels between Ben's Friends and the company. I did a lot of the same things, keeping costs low, figuring things out for myself, focusing on either the patient over here with Ben's Friends or the customer with the company. And I think a lot of the fundamentals are the same. So I currently do both.
So what's life like now? Like, what are your goals for yourself and for the future of Ben's Friends?
The company that I started is stable and doing well. Ben's Friends is stable and doing well. And the reasons are there's so much of a parallel is because we have good teams in place in both journeys. So for Ben's Friends, we've got an amazing moderator team in place. We've got interns. We've got like a great student internship program where mostly pre-meds come and intern on the community. And so many of them go on to be accepted into medical school. So that's happened at least 4 times already.
Wow.
So we've got that. Things are running very smoothly there. So I guess I could say that I want to keep doing more of the same.
Nice. So I do have one question going back to when you were, talking about the progression of Ben's Friends, and you were saying that these communities were so successful and you were excited about that. How were they successful? How do you define success in one of these communities?
Yeah. So I think there's like the quantitative and the non-quantitative. So quantitative, they had great traffic metrics. People were joining, people were posting, people were viewing. And then the non-quantitative is people really enjoyed the community. And the reason I can say that is because people thanked me and sent our moderators emails thanking us. And so they said, this is fantastic. There's a lot of communities out there already, but the insider secret is some of them are run by pharmaceuticals and you never really know. They've got the beautiful front page, beautiful, they may be even advertised on Facebook, but they're run by some pharmaceuticals. And so it becomes like a little bit of a, conflict of interest. And so they were very upfront about us. We don't sell data. We would never sell data. We just keep our operating costs low so that we don't have to rely on anything other than mostly just donations from friends and family and from our members. And so we built trust. So that's why I say they're successful, is because the numbers are there and members thank us and the team for building these communities with integrity.
Yeah, and I think that also gets to one of my questions, one of my thoughts as we're coming into this is, I think pharma companies and rare disease organizations to an extent also, they think about, when patients get together online and feel compelled to share with each other, they feel compelled to share how they feel on a drug, say in a blinded clinical trial as well. And that can throw a wrench into the trial, right? When you unblind because of what you say on a group like this. Have you had any experience with something like that in your groups?
No, not yet, not really. I don't think we try to stay more towards sharing your story, like sharing how your journey, helping others, with mostly with the emotional side.
Mm-hmm.
Occasionally there's doctor recommendations, which I think we feel is safe. Like, hey, I love my neurosurgeon.
Right.
He's near you, that kind of stuff. Specific drugs and treatments, kind of like, we're kind of cautious about
Yeah.
that stuff.
Ben, let's think a little more personal for you. What has the last 15 years or so done for you? Watching Ben friends come to life and go from one group to another and another and another. Can you think of any particular thank you letters or lessons that you've learned and have come to appreciate over the last decade or so?
I remember one of the community members, his name was Liam, and this guy was just resilient, and it was just that spirit that he would not. So he had, um, I'm not sure if he was in a wheelchair or with a walker, but he definitely only had one arm, that functional arm, and he lived in Ireland. And I remember him telling stories about how he just would not accept not being able to do things, and he renovated his entire house. He was just doing construction renovations on his house, and he said, I'm not going to let, like, the fact that I only have one arm stop me from that. So I mean, I think the biggest lesson of all of this is gratitude. Like, that is the key to happiness. Gratitude, being thankful for what you have. Don't take things for granted, because it could be taken away from you at any time. And so I know. I mean, and a lot of you and your listeners know, like, that the gratitude is the key, and never compare yourselves to anybody else, because you don't really know what they're going through. Maybe, the grass is always greener on the other side. It seems like, right, but not really. So, I'm very thankful. Like, thankful to be alive. I have a great family. I have great friends, and yeah, I think reading some of those books, like, would really, because the one that turned it around was Anthony Robbins. I remember I was depressed. I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do? Like, my plans were completely changed. I just give up. Like, what's the point of it all? And then I read that book. It just, like, motivated me, and it gave me a plan and a path. And so, from that book, I learned to be grateful and to have a plan and execute on it.
I've observed that low point a little bit because one of my best friends had an AVM, and he had like a 15-hour brain surgery. I'm sure you're well familiar with it. And he couldn't add 5 plus 5. He couldn't operate his cell phone at the very beginning. And he's come a long, long ways. But I can relate to what that low point looks like a little bit, just because I experienced it a little through my buddy. And so what were the toughest things as you were recovering and coming back to life after your AVM?
For myself, the toughest part probably was a period of 2 years, the first 2 years, where I was very vulnerable of having another brain bleed.
Mm-hmm.
And so every day I would be wondering, is today the day? Is today the day? Is today the day? And that continued for 2 years until I went in for my it was an interim checkup. And so they did a full MRI and said that the AVM has completely disappeared after 2 years of waiting. So you should be good to go. It should never be a problem again. Those 2 years are the hardest.
Yeah.
Did you find yourself in that 2-year period approaching life differently? Like, were you preparing for any day to be the end and kind of getting, what movies and TV call it, your affairs in order? And if so, what were some challenges that you kind of, or hurdles you jumped over in that process?
Yeah, so it that process was transformative to my life and my family's life because it made me realize the fundamental truth of life is that we all die,
Mm,
right? And sometimes it's in 70 years, 80 years, sometimes it's 20 years, sometimes it's 10, sometimes it's 2, right? But it's all going to come for us. So what really matters is what you do with the remaining years, and we never
mm,
really know, right? So the lesson, especially in those 2 years, was okay, maybe I have 1 year, maybe I have 2 years. Let me make the most of it.
mm,
And let me just abandon like any kind of emotional baggage that I may have and start from scratch. Like this is
mm,
a fresh start. And if it's not like, I mean, the chances were it's not 2 years, but there's a small chance. Chances are, it's going to be on. But whatever it is take advantage of the remaining years, and as much as possible. We're all human, but stay above the pettiness and stay above the small stuff,
yeah.
and focus on the big stuff because we never know. And so I took that, as well as not to care what people think about you.
Mm,
Don't care what people think about you. Like stop. There was a book called "Not Caring What Other People Think Is a Superpower," and I was like, "This is fantastic because I really don't care. I almost died. You know, what people think of me." So that gave me a tremendous ability to take on these like crazy risks. Which I dropped everything and I started my education all over again. And I applied to medical school and I got accepted. And I was a 32-year-old medical student, which is about 10 years older than the rest of my classmates,
mm,
but I didn't care. And then I quit that to start a company, and people thought I was crazy. But I said, I got one life to live, and I'm going to
yeah.
make the most of it. And if I fail miserably, then who cares? If
Yeah.
nobody, my parents are still going to love me, my friends are still going to love me. Who cares if I fail?
And even if you fail, you were in the arena, getting your hands dirty and figuring it out and actually working, doing the work. So I love hearing that because it obviously reveals so much freedom that you were able to experience because you were able to, like I said, get over the emotional baggage and work through the things that really just don't matter and start over.
Yeah,
Although, not all of us are going to face death maybe that clearly and that closely, and then, live beyond that door or whatever you want to call it. But I love the lesson that I feel like you're preaching, which is to find the things that matter and focus there. Forget about what others say. Forget about what you thought mattered. Dig deep. Get into the point of life, and move forward in what you want to do. You have one life to live. Who cares if you quit and move on? And who cares that somebody makes fun of you? Like, you sure that's a risk you want to take? I love hearing
exactly.
Yeah.
the freedom that comes with
Exactly.
your story for you.
There's a tremendous power in not caring what other people think about how you look, what you drive, your
Right.
accomplishments. It's all about like you and your fulfillment. And yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I think you nailed it.
I love that. Well, Ben, it's been really incredible to talk to you. If there are people out there who listen and really want to connect with people like them with their disease, where do they go?
Sure. Yeah. So our main website is bensfriends.org, and that's just kind of our organizational website. The actual communities are different websites, but you can find them if you go to the top, click community list, and then there you see the diseases in which we have a community, and that list grows. So if we don't have one for you, please feel free to suggest one, and we'll see what we can do.
Ben, thank you again for joining us and for sharing a little bit of your story and for continuing to maintain the communities that you have built over the years. We all know there are lots of other options, right? Other groups, other platforms, especially in 2021. There's an app for everything, right? And I'm grateful that you and your co-founder and your moderators and the team that you spoke so highly of are committed and continue to do the work that they find purpose in doing, and I know that it's made incredible impact on the Rare Disease community. So thank you for sharing with us today, and thank you for continuing the work that you set out to do so many years ago.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so happy and grateful for the opportunity to share our stories with all your listeners. So thank you.
Our guests constantly give me a different perspective on a different element of life, if not all of life itself. And I love how Ben focused on gratitude and the need to be grateful and thankful for what we have in life, which, as you know, is the way we close out our show. So, Kyle, what is your thank you note for this episode?
Well, my thank you note really incorporates Ben, because what I want to do is thank the idea of life hacks in general. You know, he gave a really great one at the beginning was, hey, if you want to know this book, you can get it in like 20 minutes on YouTube. And I am certainly going to use that. I didn't even think of that. I didn't know about that. So I'm going to use that after we record today. And so thank you to Lifehacks and Ben.
Well, my thank you goes out to, it's kind of generic, but the wheelchair. As we talked about before, I kind of banged up my body a little bit recently, and I was able to pull that wheelchair out of storage and utilize it even just for a temporary time. So I'm grateful that there's some ability to utilize the tool that helps me get through the day, and I'm thankful for that. Of course, we'd encourage you to check out our show notes. Inside those show notes, you'll see and find links to Ben's Friends, the organization that he's been working on, and then we touched on here in this episode. We also want to remind you to check out episode 69 from our friend Effie over at Once Upon a Gene. Her podcast, is pretty amazing in and of itself, but also the interview she did with Ben gets into a little bit more of his story and his history. We barely scratched the surface in this episode. If you're enjoying this show, we'd encourage you to share it with your friends and subscribe on iTunes or whatever your favorite podcast app is. We look forward, as always, to sharing another episode with you next week. But in the meantime,
keep living with urgency. Thank you for listening to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast. This show is possible with your support. Visit twodisableddudes.com to donate.
Connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app.